Welcome. We are the Ministry of the Real Truth. It's been a while. We've been busy working, and nights make you extra tired. But we came across this very, very interesting book by a man called Kahlil Gibran. In case you've never heard of him, here is the information on this particular man. Born January 6, 1883 to April 10, 1931, that was when he died. Usually referred to in English as Kahlil Gibran. Was a Lebanese-American writer, poet and visual artist. He was also considered a philosopher, although he himself rejected the title. He is best known as the author of The Prophet, which was first published in the United States in 1923. It has since become one of the best-selling books of all time, having been translated into more than 100 languages. You have come across people that actually have that book, a couple of his books, and we read a little bit of it, and it's very interesting. He was born in a village of the Ottoman-ruled Mount Lebanon Mustarifat to a Maronite family, who are Maronites, a Christian ethno-religious group native to the Eastern Mediterranean and Levant region of the Middle East, whose members traditionally belong to the Maronite Church, possibly of Syria. Young Gibran immigrated with his mother and siblings to the United States in 1895. As his mother worked as a seamstress, he was enrolled at a school in Boston, etc., etc. And his drawings were published for the first time at Day Studio in Boston in 1904. And his first book in Arabic was published in 1905 in New York City, USA. With the financial help of a newly met benefactress, Mary Haskell, Gibran studied art in Paris from 1908 to 1910. While there, he came in contact with Syrian political thinkers promoting rebellion in Ottoman-occupied Syria after the Young Turk Revolution. Some of Gibran's writings voicing the same ideas as well as anti-clericalism, opposition to religious authority, typical in social or political matters, would eventually be banned by the Ottoman authorities. In 1911, Gibran settled in New York, where his first book in English, The Madman, would be published by Alfred A. Knopf in 1918, with writing of The Prophet or The Earth's Gods also underway, and so forth. As worded by Syrian Bushri, professor, author, poet, critic, translator, and peacemaker, he was a prominent scholar in regard to the life and works of the Lebanese-American author and poet Kahlil Gibran. As worded by Syrian Bushri and Joe Jenkins, Gibran's life had been described as one often caught between Nietzschean rebellion, Blakean pantheism, and Sufi mysticism. Gibran discussed different themes in his writings and explored diverse literary forms. Salma Kadra Jayusi had called him the single most important influence on Arabic poetry and literature during the first half of the 20th century, and he was still celebrated as a literary hero in Lebanon. At the same time, most of Gibran's paintings expressed his personal vision, incorporating spiritual and mythological symbolism, with art critic Alice Raphael recognizing in the painter a classicist whose work owed more to the findings of Da Vinci than it did to any modern insurgent. His prodigious body of work has been described as an artistic legacy to people of all nations. It's all about his childhood, and his family life, his drawings, his first art exhibition in Paris, and that's with the help of Mary Haskell, whom he met, and they were engaged for a while but never married, which the family didn't like the idea of. and so forth. He went back to the United States, and his reputation grew. And then he had some sort of association with this May Zedaya, who lived in Egypt, and he asked her to criticize his work by the looks of it. And these three of his books, The Madman, The Pen League, and The Prophet, or something associated to that. And then his death. The book we're looking at is called Jesus, the Son of Man, written in 1928 by Gibran. Okay, so go and have a look at that. It's also available on Project Gutenberg. We can leave the link to that underneath, because this particular one, to read this original version, you have to sign in. It's a free sign up, and then you can review the book for an hour and then renew it again, as long as nobody else beats you to it. So I'm going to have a look at this book, Jesus the Son of Man, by Kahlil Gibran, by the people that were the closest to Jesus, or they knew him most. There's many other books of Kahlil Gibran. His power came from some great reservoir of spiritual life, else it could not have been so universal and so potent. But the majesty and beauty of the language with which he clothed it were all his own. Claude Bragdon, and he's listed his books, published by Alfred A. Knopf. Jesus, the Son of Man. His words and his deeds as told and recorded by those who knew him. Table of contents. This is free in the public domain, public access. There shouldn't be any copyright problem there. It goes quite deep into those who knew of Jesus, the Son of Man. James, the son of Zebedee, probably one of his disciples, and he goes on about the day that he actually met Christ, and he says that Jesus accused the scribes and the Pharisees, because he was speaking in a marketplace at Jerusalem. He spoke to the multitudes of the kingdom of heaven, and he accused the scribes and the Pharisees of setting snares and digging pitfalls into the path of those who long after the kingdom, and he denounced them, because he basically said to them in the Americanized Modern Bible Version, you've shut the doors to heaven against those, who wish to enter in, etc., etc., with your falsities. And he accused the scribes and the Pharisees of setting snares and digging pitfalls in the path of those who long after the kingdom, and he denounced them, the Pharisees. Now amongst the crowd was a company of men who defended the Pharisees and the scribes, and they sought to lay hands upon Jesus and upon probably the disciples as well, James being one of them. But he avoided them and turned aside from them and walked towards the north of the city. And he said to us, Jesus said to us, with them, my hour has not yet come. Many other things I still have to say unto you, and many other deeds I should yet perform, ere I deliver myself up to the world. Before, that's what it means. Then he said, and there was joy and laughter in his voice, let us go into the north country and meet the spring. Come with me to the hills, for winter is past, and the snows of Lebanon are descending to the valleys to sing with the brooks. The fields and the vineyards have vanished. Sleep and are awake to greet the sun with their green figs and tender grapes. This book is how Kahlil Gibran saw Jesus, right, according to all those, probably those lost gospels, etc., that he came across. And he walked before us, and we followed him that day and the next. And upon the afternoon of the third day, we reached the summit of Mount Hermon, and there he stood looking down upon the cities of the plains. And his face shone like molten gold, and he outstretched his arms, and he said to us, the disciples, behold, or look, take note, the earth in her green raiment, and see how the streams have hemmed the edges of her garments with silver. In truth, the earth is fair, and all that is upon her is fair. But there is a kingdom beyond all that ye behold, and therein I, Jesus, shall rule. And if it is your choice, disciples, and if it is indeed your desire, you too shall come and rule with me. And they sit on those 12 thrones and are judges of the tribes of Israel, the 12 tribes of Israel. Thus spoke Jesus, and unto all the kingdoms of the earth I was blinded, and unto all the cities of walls and towers, and it was in my heart to follow the master to his kingdom. That's James speaking. Then just at that moment Judas of Iscariot stepped forth, and he walked close up to Jesus and spoke and said, Behold, or look, the kingdoms of the world are vast, take note. And behold, take note, the cities of David and Solomon shall prevail against the Romans. If you will be the king of the Jews, Jesus, we shall stand beside you with sword and shield, and we shall overcome the alien, or the Romans, the foreigners, right, the invaders. But when Jesus heard this, he turned upon Judas, and his face was filled with wrath, or anger. And he spoke in a voice terrible as the thunder of the sky, and he said, Get you behind me, Satan, think that you knew that I came down the years to rule an anthill for a day. And he states, His throne is a throne beyond your vision. To Judas, shall he whose wings encircle the earth seek shelter in a nest abandoned and forgotten? Shall the living be honoured and exalted by the wearer of shrouds? My kingdom is not of this earth, and my seat is not builded upon the skulls of your ancestors. If you seek aught save the kingdom of the Spirit, then it were better for you to leave me here and go down to the caves of your dead, where the crowned heads of your hold court in their tombs, and may still be bestowing honours upon the bones of your forefathers. Dare you tempt me with a crown of dross when my forehead seeks the Pleiades, or else your thorns? Dare you tempt me with a crown of dross when my forehead seeks the Pleiades, or else your thorns? Were it not for a dream dreamed by a forgotten race, I would not suffer your sun to rise upon my patience, nor your moon to throw my shadow across your path. Were it not for a mother's desire, I would have stripped me of the swaddling clothes and escaped back to space. And were it not for sorrow in all of you, I would not have stayed to weep. Who are you, and what are you, Judas Iscariot, and why do you tempt me? Have you in truth weighed me in the scale and found me one to lead legions of pygmies, and to direct chariots of the shapeless against an enemy that encamps only in your hatred and marches nowhere but in your fear? Too many are the worms that crawl about my feet, etc., etc. And he goes on and on about to Judas. And then they left and walked off somewhere. And Judas, probably ashamed, follows him, but at a distance. Anna, the mother of Mary, always thought she was the mother of John the Baptist. I have to read that verse again. Okay, and it goes on about 3 wise men. When Jesus was born, when he was an infant, the 3 wise men turned up, and so forth. Asaph, called the orator of Tyre. What shall I say of his speech? Perhaps something about his person lent power to his words and swayed those who heard him, for he was comely, and the sheen of the day was upon his countenance. Men and women gazed at him more than they listened to his argument, but at times he spoke with the power of a spirit, and that spirit had authority over those who heard him. So he must have been a real good looking dude. In my youth I heard the orators of Rome and Athens and Alexandria. The young Nazarene was unlikely to walk. Probably in the scriptures they say, oh, he wasn't really anything to look at, etc., etc., and other people stress that. But that's probably possibly inserted so you concentrate on what he said rather than what he looked like, or whatever colour he was, right? Okay. The more important thing was the message of the gospel, not what he looked like or what skin colour he was. He heard this guy, Asaph, had heard the orators of Rome and Athens and Alexandria. The young Nazarene was unlike them all. They assembled their words with art to enthrall the ear, to captivate, right? But when you heard him, your heart would leave you and go wandering into regions not yet visited. Yeah, they'd use trigger words or that sort of stuff. He would tell a story or relate a parable, and the like of his stories and parables had never been heard in Syria. He seemed to spin them out of the seasons, and even as time spins the years and the generations. He would begin a story. Thus, the ploughman went forth to the fields and to sow his seeds. Or once there was a rich man who had many vineyards. He knew the source of their older self and the persistent thread of which we are woven. The Greek and the Roman orators spoke to their listeners of life as it seemed to the mind. The Nazarene spoke of a longing that lodged in the heart. They saw life with eyes only a little clearer than yours and mine. He saw life in the light of God. And this Asaph often thought that he spoke to the crowd as a mountain would speak to the plain, and in his speech there was a power that was not commanded by the orators of Athens or Rome. It's completely different, way better, etc. Mary Magdalene. It was in the month of June when she saw him for the first time. He was walking in a wheat field when she passed by with her handmaidens, and he was alone. The rhythm of his step was different from other men's, and the movement of his body was like naught he'd seen before, nothing she'd seen before. Men do not pace the earth in that manner, and even now, or in her era, afterwards, she didn't know whether he walked fast or slow. Her handmaidens pointed their fingers at him and spoke in shy whispers to one another. Probably that he was so handsome or whatever, right? She stayed her steps for a moment and raised her hand to hail him, but he did not turn his face, and he did not look at her. So she hated him. She was swept back into herself, and she was as cold as if it had been in a snow drift, and she shivered. That night she beheld him in her dreaming, and they told her afterward that she screamed in her sleep and was restless upon her bed. Month of August, that she saw him again through the window, etc., etc. He's just standing there, still as, and so forth. This and my slave, the Egyptian, or servant probably, came to me and said, that man is here again, he's sitting there across the garden. Because when the Israelites, the Jews, etc., were freed or liberated from Egypt, their bondage, their shackles, etc., many of the Egyptians saw the amazing miracles that Moses commanded and Aaron performed, like throwing down the staff or the rod, and it becomes a big ass snake or something, or a snake, and it gobbles up the Egyptian snakes, because they were magicians. They threw down their stuff. They said, oh, his one's a trick, we can do the same. But his snake or whatever gobbled that one up, or crocodile gobbled the other ones up. Okay? So they believed in the God of Moses. They converted, right? And then when they left, some of these Egyptians went with them. They went back to somewhere in Syria, and the Syrians ended up going to Egypt. And apparently in scripture is like there's three that God's going to use: the Egyptians, the Israelites, and somebody else. We've got who they were, but yeah, it's in scripture. In the original ancient Aramaic type Asher. They went back to the Asherite, the land of the Asherite, that's right. And the Asherites ended up they went to Egypt, there, etc., etc. So, okay, so this woman, Mary Magdalene, is looking at him. He looked at me, and his night eyes saw me as no man had seen me, and suddenly I was as if naked, and I was shy, and etc., etc. She didn't understand what he was saying to her. Philemon, a Greek apothecary. The Nazarene was the master physician of his people. No other man knew so much of our bodies and of their elements and properties. He made whole those who were afflicted with diseases unknown to the Greeks and to the Egyptians. They say he even called back the dead to life, and whether this be true or not true, it declares his power. For only to him who was wrought great things is the greatest ever attributed. They say also that Jesus visited India, in the country between the two rivers, and that there was the priest revealed to him knowledge of all that is hidden in the recesses of our flesh. So the country between two rivers might be Mesopotamia. Yet that knowledge may have been given him direct by the gods and not through the priest. For that which has remained unknown to all men for an eon, unknown age, may be disclosed to one man in but a moment, and Apollo may lay his hand on the heart of the obscure and make it wise. Many doors were opened to the Tyrians and the Thebans, and to this man also certain sealed doors were opened. He entered the temple of the soul, which is the body, and he beheld the evil spirits that conspire against our sinews, or our inners, and also the good spirits that spin the threads thereof. And this guy, Philemon, states, methinks it was by the power of opposition and resistance that he healed the sick, but in a manner unknown to our philosophers. He astonished fever with his snow-like touch, and it retreated, and he surprised the hardened limbs with his own calm, and they yielded to him, and were at peace. He knew the ebbing sap within the furrowed bark, but how he reached the sap with his fingers, this guy has no clue. He knew the sound steel underneath the rust, but how he freed the sword and made it shine, no man can tell. Sometimes it seems to Philemon that he heard the murmuring pain of all things that grow in the sun, and that then he lifted them up and supported them, not only by his knowledge but also by disclosing to them their own power to rise and become whole, and so forth. Yet he was not much concerned with himself as a physician. He was rather preoccupied with the religion and the politics of that land. And this Philemon regrets, for first of all, things must be sound of body. But the Syrians, when they are visited by an illness, seek an argument rather than medicine. And pity it is that the greatest of all the physicians chose rather to be but a maker of speeches in the marketplace. Simon, who was called Peter, who was on the shore of the lake of Galilee when I first beheld Jesus, my Lord and Master. My brother Andrew was with me, and we were casting our nets into the waters. Basically, what the scriptures talk about. And Jesus says, follow me to the shores of greater sea. I shall make you fishers of men, and your net will never be empty, and so forth. And talks about his brother Andrew. Caiaphas, the high priest, that's where they start to speak out against him. In speaking of that man Jesus and of his death, let us consider two salient facts. The Torah, or the book of instruction, or the book of law, must needs be held in safety by us, and his kingdom must needs be protected by Rome. Now that man was defiant to us and to Rome. He poisoned the mind of the simple people, and he led them as if by magic against us and against Caesar. Caiaphas' own slaves, both men and women, after hearing him speak in the marketplace, turned sullen and rebellious. Some of them left his house and escaped to the desert whence they came. Forget not that the Torah is obviously the Hebrew or Jewish foundation, and their tower of strength. No man shall undermine us while we have this power to restrain his hand, and no man shall overthrow Jerusalem so long as its walls stand upon the ancient stone that David laid. If the seed of Abraham is indeed to live and thrive, the soil must remain undefiled. And that man Jesus was a defiler and a corrupter. They slew him, the high priest, etc., with a conscience both deliberate and clean. And we shall slay all those who would debase the laws of Moses or seek to befoul our sacred heritage. We and Pontius Pilatus, or Pilate, knew the danger in that man, and that it was wise to bring him to an end. Caiaphas then states that he would see that his followers come to the same end, and the echo of his word to the same silence, blot him out altogether, and also those who preached him. If Judea is to live, all men who oppose her must be brought down to the dust, or these Pharisees, etc., and their Roman masters. And here Judea shall die, and if Judea shall die, I will cover my grey head with ashes, even as did Samuel the prophet, and I will tear off this garment of Aaron, and clothe me in sackcloth, and until I go hence forever. It goes off into eternity, dies, it goes into eternity. Joanna, the wife of Herod's steward. Jesus was never married, but he was a friend of woman, and he knew them as they would be known in sweet comradeship, and he loved children as they would be loved in faith and understanding. In the light of his eyes there was a father and a brother and a son within him, right? That's what he was like. He would hold a child upon his knees and say, "Of such is your might and your freedom, and of such is the kingdom of the Spirit." They say that Jesus heeded not the law of Moses, and that he was over forgiving to the prostitutes of Jerusalem and the countryside. He himself at that time was deemed a prostitute. Oh, okay, this is the woman, Joanna, the wife of Herod's steward. She herself at that time was deemed a prostitute, for she loved a man who was not her husband, and he was a Sadducee. So he was a holy man, right? A sect, right? Like the Pharisees. On a day, the Sadducees came upon her in her house when her lover was with her, and they seized her and held her, and the lover walked away and left her. Oh, what a great guy. Get what he want, and then, when it comes to the crunch, oh, you're on your own, lady. Then they led me to the marketplace where Jesus was teaching. They led her to where Jesus was, right? They're going to stone her or something like that. It was their desire to hold her up before him as a test and trap for him, but Jesus judged her not. He laid shame upon those who would have had her shamed, and he reproached them. He scolded them, right? And he bade her go her way, go forth and sin no more, etc., etc. And after all that, all the taste of the fruit of life turned sweet to her mouth, and the scentless blossoms breathed fragrance into her nostrils. She became a woman without a tainted memory, and she was free, and her head was no longer bowed down. She held her head high walking through the streets, right? Rivka, the bride of Cana. This happened before he was known to the people. This person was in her mother's garden, tending the rose bushes, when he stopped at their gate, and he said, "I am thirsty, will you give me water from your well?" She goes and gives him a cup of water, etc. And he goes to her marriage, her wedding to be, and so forth, as the scriptures read about that. A Persian philosopher in Damascus, and he states, he cannot tell the fate of this man, nor can he say what shall befall his disciples. A seed hidden in the heart of an apple is an orchard invisible. Yeah, that's true. That's a really good saying. A seed hidden in the heart of an apple is an orchard invisible if you plant it, right? Yet should that seed fall upon a rock, it will come to nothing or naught. Yeah, it'll just dry up because it ain't got no roots, right? No good soil to rest in, die and then grow. However, the scripture says, seed's got to die first in order to grow and all that sort of stuff. But this I say, the ancient God of Israel is harsh and relentless. Israel should have another God, one who is gentle and forgiving, who would look down upon them with pity, one who would descend with the rays of the sun and walk on the path of their limitations, rather than sit forever in the judgment, seek to weigh their faults and measure their wrongdoings. So, a different God from the Pharisees and Sadducees. Israel should bring forth a God whose heart is not a jealous heart, and whose memory of their shortcomings is brief, one who would not avenge himself upon them to even the third and fourth generations. Man here in Syria is like man in all lands. He would look into the mirror of his own understanding and therein find his deity. He would fashion the gods after his own likeness and worship that which reflects his own image. In truth, man prays to his deeper longing that it may rise and fulfill some of his desires. There is no depth beyond the soul of man, and the soul is the deep that calls unto itself. For there is no other voice to speak, and there are no other ears to hear. Even we in Persia would see our faces in the disk of the sun, and our bodies dancing in the fire that we kindle upon the altars. Now the God of Jesus, whom he called Father, would not be a stranger unto the people of Jesus, and he would fulfill their desires. The gods of Egypt have cast off their burden of stones and fled to the Nubian desert to be free among those who are still free from knowing. The gods of Greece and Rome are vanishing into their own sunset. They were too much like men to live in the ecstasy of men. The groves in which their magic was born have been cut down by the axes of the Athenians and the Alexandrians. And in this land also the high places are made low by the laws of Beirut and the young hermits of Antioch. Only the old woman and the weary men seek the temples of their forefathers. Only the exhausted at the end of the road seek its beginning. But this man Jesus, this Nazarene, he has spoken of a God too vast to be unlike the soul of any man, too knowing to punish, too loving to remember the sins of his creatures. And this God of the Nazarenes shall pass over the threshold of the children of the earth, and he shall sit in part 1 we covered a Persian, and he goes on about Christ, and his God is the God of Zoroaster, the God who is a sun in the sky and fire upon the earth and light in the bosom of man. He is content, he needs no other God. Okay, so maybe he's rejecting Christ. Not too sure there. David, one of his followers, it's not talking about King David, and this person states, he did not know the meaning of his discourses or his parables until he was no longer among us, dead and risen again and ascended. Nay, no, I did not understand until his words took living forms before my eyes and fashioned themselves into bodies that walk in the procession of my own day. Let me tell you this, on a night as I sat in my house pondering and remembering his words and his deeds that I might inscribe them in a book, 3 thieves entered my house, and though I knew they came to rob me of my goods, I was too mindful of what I was doing to meet them with the sword, or even to say, what do you do here? What do you here? What do you want here? But I continued writing my remembrances of the Master, and when the thieves had gone, then I remembered his saying, he who would take your cloak, let him take your other cloak also. And I understood. And as I sat recording his words, no man could have stopped me, even were he to have carried away all my possessions. For though I would guard my possessions and also my person, I know where lies the greater treasure. So didn't worry, you take it all, bro. I don't care. You know, these are just earthly things. I'm looking for the heavenly, the kingdom things, right? That you can't steal, you can't get in there and steal, etc., etc., as the scriptures state. And there's Luke. Jesus despised and scorned the hypocrites, and his wrath was like a tempest that scourged them. His voice was thunder in the ears, and he cowed them. In their fear of him they sought his death, and like moles in the dark earth they worked to undermine his footsteps. But he fell not into their snares. He laughed at them, for well he knew that the spirit shall not be mocked, nor shall it be taken in the pitfall. He held a mirror in his hand, and therein he saw the sluggard and the limping, and those who stagger and fall by the roadside on the way to the summit, and he pitied them all. He would even have raised them to a stature, and he would have carried their burden. No, he would have bid their weakness lean on his strength. He did not utterly condemn the liar or the thief or the murderer, but he did utterly condemn the hypocrite whose face is masked and whose hand is gloved. Often Luke pondered on the heart that shelters all who come from the wasteland to its sanctuary, yet against the hypocrite is closed and sealed. On a day as all the disciples rested with him in the garden of pomegranates, he said to him, Master, you forgive and console the sinner and all the weak and the infirm, save only the hypocrite alone. And he said, you have chosen your words well when you called sinners weak and infirm. I do forgive them their weakness of body and their infirmity of spirit, for their failings have been laid upon them by their forefathers, or by the greed of their neighbours. But I tolerate not the hypocrite, because he himself lays a yoke upon the guileless and the yielding. Weaklings, whom you call sinners, are like the featherless young that fall from the nest. The hypocrite is the vulture waiting upon a rock for the death of the prey. Weaklings are men lost in a desert, but the hypocrite is not lost. He knows the way, yet he laughs between the sand and the wind. For this cause I do not receive him. This is Christ, right? Thus our Master, or Jesus, spoke, and Luke did not understand, but later on he understood. Then the hypocrites of the land laid hands upon him, and they judged him, and in doing so they deemed themselves justified. For they cited the law of Moses, or Torah, in the Sanhedrin, and witness and evidence against him. And they who break the law at the rise of every dawn and break it again at sunset brought about his death. So they are responsible for his death. Part with the Romans, right? Part and part with the Romans. Matthew, the Sermon on the Mount. Guess what about that? And what Jesus said, blessed are they, blessed are them. The beatitudes, the best attitudes to have. Beautiful attitudes. Here's the Lord's Prayer. And Jesus said, when you would pray, let your longing pronounce the words. It is in my longing now to pray this. Our Father in earth and heaven, sacred is thy name. Thy will be done with us, even as in space. Give us of thy bread, sufficient for the day. In thy compassion forgive us and enlarge us to forgive one another. Guide us toward thee and stretch down thy hand to us in darkness. For thine is the kingdom, and in thee is our power and our fulfillment. And so forth. John, the son of Zebedee. You have remarked that some of us call Jesus the Christ, and some the Word, and the others call him the Nazarene, and still others the Son of Man. I will try to make these names clear in the light that is given me. The Christ, he who was in the Ancient of Days, is the flame of God that dwells in the spirit of man. He is the breath of life that visits us and takes us unto himself, a body like our bodies. He is the will of the Lord. He is the first word which would speak with our voice and live in our ear, that we may heed and understand. And the word of the Lord our God builded a house of flesh and bones, and it was a man like unto you and myself. In other words, he became a human being, God in flesh, right? God became man. For he could not hear the song of the bodiless wind, nor see our greatest self walking in the midst, unless he became human, right? Many times the Christ has come to the world, and he has walked many lands, and also he had been deemed a stranger and a madman. So what it's basically saying, he was there when Moses was leading the people. God was speaking to Moses, but Christ was there speaking to him also, but not known as Christ, right? Yet the sound of his voice descended never to emptiness, for the memory of man keeps that which his mind takes no care to keep. Many times Christ has come to the world, and he has walked many lands, and always he has been deemed a stranger and a madman. Yet the sound of his voice descended never to emptiness, for the memory of man keeps that which his mind takes no care to keep. This is the Christ, the innermost in the height, who walks as man towards eternity. Have you not heard of him at the crossroads of India, and in the land of the Magi, the three wise men, and upon the sands of Egypt? And here in your north country your bards of old sang of Prometheus, the fire bringer, he who was the desire of man fulfilled, the caged hope made free, and Orpheus, who came with a voice and a lyre, it's like a type of guitar, right, stringed instrument, to quicken the spirit and beast in man. And know you not of Mithra, the king of Zoroaster, the prophet of the Persians, who woke from man's ancient sleep and stood at the bed of our dreaming? We ourselves become man anointed when we meet in a temple invisible once every 1,000 years. Then comes one forth embodied, at his coming of our silence turns to singing. Yet our ears turn not always to listen, nor your eyes to seeing. We've got to have a look at Kahlil Gibran, because we missed something out. He met the prophet of Baha'i faith, somewhere up here, maybe down here somewhere. Let's see something about he met that prophet of the Baha'i faith. He was brought up as a Maronite Christian, but as an Arab, influenced not only by his own religion but also by Islam, especially by the mysticism of the Sufis. Besides Christianity, Islam, and Sufism, Gibran's mysticism was also influenced by Theosophy and Jungian psychology. Around 1911 to 1912, Gibran met with Abdul Baha, elder son of Baha'u'llah, and served as head of the Baha'i faith from 1892 until 1921. Okay, so here's the leader of the Baha'i faith. founded in the 19th century, who was visiting the United States to draw his portrait. The meeting made a strong impression on Gibran. One of Gibran's acquaintances later in life, Juliet Thompson, herself a Baha'i, reported that Gibran was unable to sleep the night before meeting him. This encounter with Abdul Baha later inspired Gibran to write Jesus, the Son of Man, that portrays Jesus through the words of 77 contemporaries who knew him, enemies and friends, Syrians, Romans, Jews, priests and poets. After the death of Abdul Baha, Gibran gave a talk on religion with Baha'is, and at another event with a viewing of a movie of Abdul Baha, Gibran rose to proclaim in tears an exalted station of Abdul Baha and left the event weeping. In this poem, The Voice of the Poet, published in A Tear and a Smile in 1914, Gibran wrote, "You are my brother and I love you. I love you when you prostrate yourself in your mosque and kneel in your church and pray in your synagogue. You and I are sons of one faith, the Spirit, and those that are set up as heads over its many branches are as fingers on the hands of a divinity that points to the spirits of perfection." Translated by H.M. Nahmad. So that's possibly how it should be, if you're all following that Spirit of God. There shouldn't be any problems there. Shouldn't be any infighting, wars created, extremism, all that sort of stuff over who's right and who's wrong, if you're all led by that one Spirit, that Spirit of God, and so forth. Nevertheless, Gibran called for the adoption of Arabic as a national language of Syria, considered from a geographic point of view, not as a political entity. When Gibran met Abdullah Baha in 1911-12, who travelled to the United States partly to promote peace, Gibran admired the teachings on peace but argued that young nations like his own be freed from Ottoman control, or Islamic domination. Gibran also wrote the famous Pity the Nation poem during these years, posthumously published in the Garden of the Prophet. On May 26, 1916, Gibran wrote a letter to Mary Haskell that reads, etc., etc. When the Ottomans were eventually driven from Syria during World War I, Gibran sketched a euphoric drawing of Free Syria, which was then printed on the special edition cover of the Arabic language paper As-Sayyar, the Traveller, founded in 1912 in New York by Haddad. Adal Bashara reports that in a draft of a play still kept among his papers, Gibran expressed great hope for national independence and progress. This play, according to Kahlil defines Gibran's belief in Syrian nationalism with great clarity, distinguishing it from both Lebanese and Arab nationalism, and showing us that nationalism lived in his mind even at the late stage, side by side with internationalism. According to Waterfield, Gibran was not entirely in favour of socialism, which he believed tends to seek the lowest common denominator rather than bringing out the best in people. And then his legacy, and so forth. So there he's probably put his own twist into it. Christian, Islamic, etc. flavour. Now you would know why some of us call him the Son of Man. He himself desired to be called by that name, for he knew the hunger of the thirst of man, and he beheld man seeking after his greater self. The Son of Man was Christ the gracious, who would be with us all. He was Jesus the Nazarene, who would lead all his brothers to the Anointed One, even to the Word, which was in the beginning with God. In this person's heart dwells Jesus of Galilee, the man above men, the poet who makes poets of us all, the Spirit who knocks at our door, that we may wake and rise and walk out to meet truth, naked and unencumbered. A young priest at Carpendale, and he states he was a magician, warp and woof, and a sorcerer, a man who bewildered the simple by charms and incantations, and he juggled with the words of our prophets and with the sanctities of our forefathers. Or yes, he even bade the dead be his witnesses, and the voiceless graves his forerunners and authority. He sought the woman of Jerusalem and the woman of the countryside with the cunning of a spider that seeks to fly, and they were caught in his web. For women are weak and empty-headed, and they follow the man who would comfort their unspent passion with soft and tender words. Were it not for these women, infirm and possessed by his evil spirit, his name would have been erased from the memory of man. And who were the men who followed him? They were of the horde that are yoked and trodden down. In their ignorance and fear they would never have rebelled against their rightful masters. But when he promised them high stations in his kingdom of mirage, or an illusion, they yielded to his fantasy as clay yields to the potter. Know you not the slaves in his dreaming would always be master, and the weakling would be a lion. The Galilean was a conjurer and a deceiver, a man who forgave the sins of all the sinners, that he might hear hail and hosanna from their unclean mouths, like he was wanting them to worship him, all that sort of stuff, like kind of like what the Sadducees used to be like when they walk through the country with their fancy robes and trumpets are blown before they walk, all this sort of stuff. Hey, we're coming, all that sort of stuff. They had the best seats at shows and feasts and all that sort of stuff and all this sort of crap, right? That's basically what this person is trying to say, that it's just like them. He broke the Sabbath with those who break, that he might gain the support of the lawless, and he spoke ill of our high priest, that he might win attention in the Sanhedrin, and by opposition increase his fame. So this guy's sort of like hinting that he's trying to get to be the top dog in it, probably, something like that. And he said often that he hated that man. He hates him. Yes, he hated him more than he hates the Romans who governed their country, Israel. Even his coming was from Nazareth, a town cursed by our prophets, a dunghill of the Gentiles, from which no good shall ever proceed. Yeah, that's what they said that in the scriptures. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? Because that's where Herod sent his soldiers to kill all the infants. A rich Levi in the neighbourhood of Nazareth, so this guy was a hater of him. And this guy here in the neighbourhood of Nazareth, a rich Levi, he was going on about how good he was, good carpenter, all that sort of stuff, and what works he did in regards to the architecture and so forth. And a shepherd in South Lebanon might have came across him or saw him and went and talked to him. John the Baptist to one of his disciples, I am not silent in this foul hole while the voice of Jesus is heard on the battlefield. So he's talking about him being put in prison by Herod, right? I am not to be held nor confined while he is free. They tell me the vipers are caught in his loins, but I answer, the vipers shall awaken his strength, and he shall crush them with his heel. That's scriptural, right? I am only the thunder of his lightning. Though I spoke first, his was the word and the purpose. They caught John unwarned, right? They caught him unwarned. Perhaps they will lay hands on him also, yet not before he has pronounced his word in full, and he shall overcome them. His chariot shall pass over them, and the hoofs of his horses shall trample them, and he shall be triumphant. They shall go forth with lance and sword, but he shall meet them with the power of the Spirit. His blood shall run upon the earth, but they themselves shall know the wounds and the pain thereof, and they shall be baptized in their tears until they are cleansed of their sins. Their legions shall march towards his cities with rams of iron, but on their way they shall be drowned in the river Jordan, and his walls and his towers shall rise higher, and the shield of his warriors shall shine brighter in the sun. They say I am in league with him, that he's co-conspirator with Christ, and that our design is to urge the people to rise and revolt against the kingdom of Judea and the Romans. But John answers, and would that he had flames for words. If they deem this pity of iniquity of kingdom, let it fall into destruction and be no more. Let it go the way of Sodom and Gomorrah, and let this race be forgotten by God, and this land be turned to ashes. Yes, behind these prison walls I am indeed an ally to Jesus of Nazareth, but not a co-conspirator, right? And he shall lead my armies.